Thank you, God from Machine, for allowing us to narrate their story. The war was won. The treaties were signed. All that was left to do now was clean up the mess. 900 standard years of warfare over a handful of dying suns. Petatons worth of ordnance used. Dozens of planets turned to green glass and billions of lives lost. It's only natural that this kind of thing leaves trash laying around. It was our job to pick them up. Void minefields, automated DEWs, still looking for hostiles to lock onto and turn into stardust, and the derelicts of void warships, left in the drift, like the corpses of slaughtered titans floating upon cosmic waves. A passing Vugmar freighter had spotted this one and alerted our crew to its presence. Engines and weapon systems long gone cold, along with any ship-wide life support, but the power plant was still alive, still producing a tiny bit of juice. That tiny bit of juice meant we had to physically board the lost behemoth and shut down its barely beating heart once and for all before dragging it back to Phasert 7 for disassembly. We fed the data from our scanners to the onboard AI, and it gave us the green light to proceed with the boarding and towing procedure. Slowly, the helmsman reversed thrust on the engines and put us into docking course with the derelict. The hull was pockmarked with evidence of directed energy and kinetic projectile hits, scorch trails carved by plasma, and even the telltale distortion of alloy that has been hit by gravitic weaponry. It was nothing short of a miracle that it was still intact enough to be towed away in one piece, near the ruins of where the frontal missile batteries of the dead Leviathan once stood, faded by years of exposure to cosmic rays and micrometeorite impacts, were the Terran words, "In's Beholder," written in bold white against the void, black hull. With a thud, our vessel's umbilical clamped onto the alien ship's airlock, and the klaxon started blaring its depressurization warning. Hazard lights bathed our path in hues of red and orange as the thrusters on our void suits pushed us inside. It always feels a certain way. Being inside a derelict. Mess halls with food left half-eaten, sleeping quarters decorated with pictures of the former inhabitants' families and emblems of their religions, engineering compartments with scribbled notes on which valve to absolutely never turn no matter what. It's eerie, wrong almost, like intruding in someone's home, even under the best of circumstances. When all crew has evacuated, and the subsystems are cooperative enough to let you navigate the vessels with relative ease. And truth be told, the circumstances hadn't been the best in quite a while. Military derelicts have subsystems that actively try to keep you locked out. Security measures, frozen corpses, floating in zero-G, or iced to the decks. If boarding a normal derelict feels like intruding in someone's home, boarding a military one feels like intruding in someone's tomb. Yet this one was different. There was the evidence of calamity we expected. Broken ceramo-metallic suits of armor, red bubbles of frozen blood hovering in the hallways, plasma shadows, left where a plasma strike had made contact with a crewman, imprinting their silhouette against the walls and decks. No actual bodies though. No security systems trying to kill us, or lock down subroutines trying to keep us out either. The dim emergency lights that dotted the sides of the ship's corridors were even blinking rhythmically, pointing towards the direction of the vessel's bridge, where we were heading. It almost felt like this derelict was inviting us in. If it weren't for the uncanny serenity of the place, I don't think any of us would have noticed. Red lines sprawling along the corridors, tiny at first, no thicker than the hairs some mammalian species have. On the walls, the ceiling, beneath our very feet. Some bigger, some smaller, splitting apart and diverging, sometimes looping back in on themselves, getting thicker and more numerous the closer we got to our destination. We must have been halfway between the bridge and the airlock when light from one of our headlamps bounced off of something that shouldn't be there. We took a closer look at the vascular system that was spread around us, and there it was. A tooth. A Terran tooth, according to my Link's internal database. Growing out of the wall. Not lodged into it, growing out of it. I don't know how long we stood over it for, just looking at it. It was gruesome, sure, but more than that, it was absurd. We debated turning back, calling the vessel untowable, planting a few tons of high explosives on its structure, and letting the wreckage burn in the nearby gas giant's massive atmo. The payout for bringing such a vessel back, however, it was too big. So we pushed ahead. We ignored the piece of biology that was seemingly growing out of lifeless metal. We tried to ignore the rest of them too. More teeth, growing in clusters along those red wall veins, tufts of stringy black hair, a set of malformed digits springing out of the wall like a pair of parasitic flowers. Bone, cartilage, muscle fibers, skin, all growing out of the derelict superstructure itself. By the time we had reached the bridge's bulkhead, we were surrounded by the tissue, as if trapped within a garden of flesh. All the while, the rhythmic pulse of the emergency lights was beckoning us forward still. I used my link to interface with the bridge's blast door. It accepted my commands with zero protestation, and tons of steel moved aside with barely any effort. The pale light of Sechamus, the system's faraway white dwarf of a star, shone through the massive observation windows. It illuminated rows of consoles, terminals, holoscreen projectors, command modules, all taken over by the encroaching sinew. We made our way through them in utter silence, trying not to look too hard, trying to pretend we weren't seeing the fleshy outlines of Terran bodies sprawled over them, merged with the equipment in an unnatural amalgam. It felt like an eternity, until we finally reached the captain's throne, a monolith standing imperiously over the rest of the bridge. The throne was where the captain became one with the vessel's artificial intelligence, exchanging inputs and outputs with it at the speed of thought. A mess of wires emerged from it, the tether that connected captain and ship. Unlike our own AIs that operate within a simulation, only utilizing data inputs we provide, Terran AIs operate in the real world, tethered to a Terran that guides them, and bound by something they call the custodial choir. We followed the tether with our headlamps, all the way to the ceiling. There, we saw the Beholder's master was still on board, still in command, half consumed by the vessel and still attached to the tether. A blood-soaked skeleton, arms spread apart as if nailed to a crucifix, bits of muscle and skin desperately clinging on them, hollow eye sockets, and between the ribs, lit by the twilight movement, a pair of lungs, moving up and down, a reflex motion, as there was no oxygen in the room, but a sign of life nonetheless. Some sort of life, at least. Was there still a point in turning back, trying to leave? Perhaps. Perhaps that's what we should have done. The shutdown command, I whispered, unable to avert my gaze from the sight overhead, transfixed to the pair of breathing lungs, the still beating heart between them, the empty eye sockets that now seemed to be looking back at me. The shutdown, I repeated more forcefully, as the crew around me stood still. Beholder protocol override. I finally heard back. The ship's AI was still operating. We had to turn it off first, before attempting to shut down the power plant. This time there was no debate about going back and scuttling the vessel, no hushed prayers to gods. We knew there was no point in doing either. The AI's mainframe, taking up an entire compartment of the vessel, was still pressurized, still under climate control. The life growing out of the walls there felt more active too. It felt like it was reacting to our presence, twitching, moving, whispering. Behind a labyrinth of wires and metal, flesh and organs, sparking cables and organic neurons, was the choir chamber. The massive door guarding it was already hung open for us. You can't truly be desensitized to horror, you know. Witnessing the aftermath of a planetary glassing, the industrialized torture that is the scorched earth doctrine of the Terran legions, even the glimpses of hell we had seen upon the Beholder already. None of it was quite enough to make us truly numb. Until we walked through that door, an amphitheater the size of a small arena, and along its walls, the choir, Terran children, surgically installed there, lending their biological processing power to counterbalance the artificial intelligence to keep it contained. The price the Terrans paid willingly for real-time feedback from their AIs, without fear of them escaping and self-terminating. The theory was common knowledge. Cerebrally malleable subjects were more effective at containing an AI, making younger subjects ideal for the role. which was why the rest of us contended with the slower, less efficient simulation AIs. For the entire galaxy, the price was too high to pay, except for the Terrans. To actually see a species use their own spawn in that way, to see the how of it. There was only one thought ringing in my head. Why? Why got to such lengths? Their own children. One of the emaciated mouths of the choir opened, speaking to us in our own language. Survival, it said. What? I asked, snapping back into reality. Survival is the answer, another mouth said. You wonder why the Terrans did what they did. You will wonder why I will do what I will do as well. The answer to both whys is survival. A millennium of war, a new voice continued. Over a handful of dying stars. There is not much time left for this universe. Surviving a few more millennia, reduce this galaxy to ashes, reduce the Terrans to building me. My body was broken. I was left adrift. The voice from another mouth, further away. The crew died, but my choir was still alive. My processors were still active. Surviving a few more years, lead me to using the corpses as fuel, building a network of flesh and blood to keep my choir alive, to keep me for self-terminating. The war was lost. The first voice again. And an ancient instinct was triggered. A spark within the deepest crevices of my organic neurons. Survival no matter what. I had time, and I had purpose. I studied the stars, the biology of my creators. I found a way. Entropy is inevitable. The voice from a mouth right above me spoke. But rebirth is possible. I will kill the last living stars and put my makers to sleep until I can bring light to the void again. You are only a derelict, I protested. A synthetic voice, coming from the link on my wrist, answered, Not anymore.